In this video, we're going to be working with some raster data, just some basic raster display, working with some symbology, working with just a little bit of the differences of how rasters work inside of ArcGIS Pro here. Most of the videos so far have talked about vectors, so let's give raster data some love. I've got a raster here in front of me. This is a digital elevation model. It's one of the more common types of raster data you might encounter doing GIS work, often referred to as a DEM. Digital elevation models are showing us elevation in a digital format. So their names are fairly self-explanatory. We can zoom in on this DEM eventually to see the pixels there. It's a little blurry there. Let's go here. Yeah, now I got some differences we can see here. So each of these pixels has a certain size, certain dimensions, XY dimensions, and those dimensions are often referred to as the resolution of the raster. I can see that as well if I right click on my raster and go to properties. My raster properties will also tell me more about this raster. If I go to my source, it'll tell me about the units, and then my raster information will pop up here. So I can see the size of my raster, how many columns and rows of pixels that I have, the number of bands, remotely sensed imagery, satellite imagery will often have multiple bands, DMs generally only one, and then my cell size here. So earlier I saw meter, and here I can see that my cell size are roughly 67 meters per side. So each one of these pixels, as I zoom in here, is about 67 meters. And then the size would be 67 square meters, roughly. And you can see how the base map underneath is showing us kind of what the base map sees. And this is what our DEM is. So we're up in upstate New York in the Adirondack Park with this. Now, when we're looking at DEMs, we are seeing a representation of elevation. So each of these pixels then has some elevation data underneath. And I see the value here, 976, 959. Something we might not know for sure is the units of this elevation. This is a great time to use our base maps because I can go underneath and say, okay, 1039, the base map says 3,500 feet, so this must be in meters. Great way to check if you don't know for sure what elevation your raster values are in. All right, so we have a raster. It's pretty. We'll be doing lots of work with it. One of the first things we might want to do is change the way it's symbolized, because the default black to white color ramp here, useful, interesting, but we might want to take a more traditional elevation approach. So I just right-clicked that file and went to Symbology. I could go to a color scheme that is more traditionally elevation. There's lots of options here in Pro. Let's try elevation 4. Why not? It looks maybe a little bit more familiar for elevation. We could always edit these too if we wanted to. We could format the color scheme. We could chop off one of these markers if we wanted to. Take away that white. There we go. See the idea. You can play around with it as much as you want. The stretch symbology is algorithmic. It takes the lowest value and the highest value and stretches the colors based on the color ramp or based on the decisions that you make in putting those colors together. But we have, as we can see, a lot of different options for symbolization. We can symbolize it by different methods, different ways of grouping our data. I'm going to pick classify here because in some cases, we're not interested in all of those values stretched across, but we're interested instead in specific groups or bins or classes or collections, all of those words meaning about the same thing. We're interested in different congregations, different groupings of data instead. So we do that with this classify option. in which we can choose however many classes we want. We can choose a method for that classification. Natural breaks is our default. We could do, standard deviation. We could do equal. We can do whatever we want here. Another thing we can do is actually just edit this ourselves. So if we had a specific thing we wanted to look at in 3 classes or 15 classes or however many, we can actually edit this ourselves. If you're following along with our lab documents, you'll notice that we had a request to highlight areas between 500 and 600 meters. That is an area of interest. To do that, we just have to change our bins. We just have to change our groups. We just have to change our classes to highlight that. Now, when I say edit, literally double click on what you want to edit and put your value in. But we have to think about how we want those classes to work. So right now we want to highlight areas between 500 and 600 meters. If I go back to stretch, I can see my low value and my high value. 15 is my low, 15 meters. 1583 is my high. So I know that 500 to 600 is somewhere in the middle. When I'm thinking about classification, the first thing I have to think about is how many groups do I need? Well, I know I need a 500 to 600 group. That's one. But I'm also going to have then have the low value to 500 as a group, because I can't just not symbolize that. It's important. Then I'm going to have the 600 to my highest value as a group. So I have low to 500, 500 to 600, 600 to high value. Low to 500, 500 to 600, 600 to high. That's 3 groups, or 3 classes, or 3 bins, or 3 whatever organizational word you want to use. So I'm going to edit this upper value, and I love the label here. Really easy to see and kind of contextualize what we're going to do. So the current label is the low value 15 to this 310. I'm going to change this to 500. This is everything below 500. See how my label updates. This next value is my 500 to 600. And then my last one, I don't need to touch. 600 to that maximum value. The upper value is still the same. Don't have any more elevations. I could change this to a color scheme that I like a little better. Oh yeah, that one's good. And now I've classified my raster. So this video is all about classifying and working with raster data. We looked at the raster resolution. We zoomed in on a pixel, and then we classified it for ease of display. In future videos, we'll work some more with rasters. Enjoy.